Jesus Freak here. Originally, I had done a video where I had discussed a moral quandary where I felt that I had put myself into a position where if I said something to someone that it could be understood as passive aggression. But if I didn't, it could also be understood as passive aggression for a different reason. And although I dealt with the situation, I was going to release the video with a preface. But in the end, I decided, you know what? I'm going to drop it. And I'm going to do this instead. You see, the main source of the problem is that I hold myself to a very harsh interpretation of Paul's writings. And you might say, don't you mean a strict interpretation? No, I mean a harsh interpretation is an intentionally cruel interpretation. See, the problem is that I was holding myself to an extreme interpretation of the specific King James wording of 1 Thessalonians 5:22, abstain from all appearance of evil. Now, what the text means is avoid evil wherever it shows up. But I was taking it at its literal KJV meaning. That if it's not evil, if it can be seen as evil, then it's evil. I mentioned earlier a similar issue regarding my interpretation of Romans 13, 1 through 7. And in particular, verse 2. This is the infamous powers that be passage. And I actually had Pastor Brett tell me too, and not just my friend who is, former Church of Rome and isn't churched anymore. Even Pastor Brett thought I went way over the top with my interpretation of the verse, which is let every soul be subject unto the higher powers, for there is no power but of God. The powers that be are ordained of God. Whosoever therefore resisteth the power, resisteth the ordinance of God, and they that resist shall receive to themselves damnation. For rulers are not a terror to good works, but to the evil. Wilt thou then not be afraid of the power? Do that which is good, and thou shalt have praise of the same, for he is the minister of God to thee for good. But if thou do that which is evil, be afraid, for he beareth not the sword in vain. For he is the minister of God, a revenger to execute wrath upon him that doth evil. And I pointed out that my interpretation of the verse was, if the government tells you to jump, you ask how high. And people thought that was an excessively harsh interpretation of it. Where personally, I think that's just taking it at face value. Just, it's holy writ. It's what we're supposed to do. And maybe that's just my autism. You see, this is also the reason the Pharisees were the way they were. They were so paranoid about violating the law that they, put in all these rules so that it was practically impossible to violate the law. Because you'd run into trouble with their rules long before you fall foul of breaking the law of God. Which, to be fair, Jesus condemned them for this. Because sometimes their end runs around violating the laws wound up violating the laws. And this is probably what Paul meant, in 2 Corinthians. He says, "And such trust have we through Christ to Godward, not that we are sufficient of ourselves to think anything as of ourselves." Of course, that's against stuff like Pelagianism, where people can supposedly become sinless on their own. We can't. But our sufficiency is of God, who also hath made us able ministers of the New Testament, not of the letter, but of the Spirit. For the letter killeth, but the Spirit giveth life. The letter kills, but the Spirit gives life. And obviously, following the letter to the letter is just going to run you off a cliff. And it's not like I don't know the Spirit. I'm just taking the harder interpretation. But I had to say that. Jesus freak out.